The first time I met Everly, she was standing in my boyfriend Jason's kitchen, wearing his old college t-shirt like she owned the place. Her perfectly manicured fingers traced the rim of a coffee mug that I recognized as his favorite, the one he'd told me his grandmother gave him. When Jason introduced us, she looked me up and down with the kind of calculating stare that made my skin crawl. "So, you're the one Jason's been hiding from us," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm Everly, his sister-in-law, Eleanor's wife." She emphasized the word wife like it was a weapon. "We're very close, Jason and I. Almost like siblings, you could say." I should have seen the red flags then. The way she positioned herself between Jason and me during dinner. How she brought up inside jokes and memories that deliberately excluded me. The subtle way she touched his arm when she laughed, lingering just a moment too long. But I was young and in love, and I thought I could win her over with kindness. How wrong I was. Over the next 2 years, Everly made it her mission to drive a wedge between Jason and me. She would call him at all hours with manufactured emergencies, a broken faucet that somehow only he could fix, a mysterious noise in the attic that required his immediate attention. She had a sixth sense for our special moments, appearing unannounced just as we were settling in for a romantic evening or important conversation. The breaking point came when Jason proposed. I said yes through tears of joy. But my happiness was short-lived. Within hours, Everly was calling with unsolicited advice about venues, caterers, and guest lists. She insisted on being involved in every decision, claiming it was family tradition. When I politely declined her help, she went straight to Jason. "Your fiancé doesn't seem to understand how close our family is," she told him with crocodile tears in her eyes. "I just want to be part of your special day. But she's shutting me out completely." Jason, ever the peacemaker, begged me to include her. Against my better judgment, I agreed. It was the biggest mistake of my life. Wedding planning with Everly was like navigating a minefield blindfolded. Every suggestion I made was met with subtle criticism disguised as concern. The flowers I chose were a bit too bold for a traditional ceremony. My dress was interesting, code for unflattering. The venue was ambitious for someone on my budget. But her masterpiece of manipulation came 3 weeks before the wedding. I was having lunch with Eleanor, Everly's wife, trying to build some kind of relationship with Jason's family. Eleanor was actually quite lovely. Warm, intelligent, and genuinely excited about the wedding. We were discussing the final headcount when she mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "I'm so glad Everly convinced you to invite Marcus and Sophia," Eleanor said casually, cutting into her salad. "I know it might be awkward having Jason's exes at the wedding, but Everly said you insisted it was important to start fresh with everyone." My fork clattered to my plate. Marcus and Sophia, Jason's 2 most serious ex-girlfriends, were supposed to be at my wedding, and apparently I had insisted on it. "Eleanor," I said carefully, my heart pounding. "I never said that. I didn't even know they were invited." The color drained from Eleanor's face. "Oh no," she whispered. "Everly told me. She said you'd discussed it and decided it would be the mature thing to do. She handled the invitations herself because she said you were too busy with other preparations." I called Jason immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed. When I explained what had happened, there was a long silence on the other end. "She wouldn't do that," he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. "There has to be some misunderstanding. Jason, your ex-girlfriends received wedding invitations. From us. With our names on them. How is that a misunderstanding?" That evening, we confronted Everly together. She sat in her pristine living room, surrounded by expensive furniture and family photos that somehow managed to exclude Eleanor from most of them. When we explained the situation, her reaction was perfectly crafted innocence. "Oh my goodness," she gasped, pressing her hand to her chest. "I'm so sorry. I was trying to help with the guest list, and I must have gotten confused. You mentioned wanting to invite everyone important to Jason, and I just assumed. She was good. I had to give her that." The tears, the stammering apology, the way she made it sound like a genuine mistake born from enthusiasm. Jason believed her, or at least wanted to. But I saw the flash of satisfaction in her eyes before she covered it with remorse. We uninvited Marcus and Sophia, but the damage was done. They had already made arrangements, booked flights, requested time off work. The awkwardness of the situation rippled through Jason's friend group and family. Some people whispered that I was being controlling, that it was petty not to invite his exes if they were truly just friends. But Everly wasn't done with me yet. Not even close. The morning of my wedding dawned gray and drizzly, as if the universe itself was trying to warn me. I should have been nervous about normal things. Would the flowers arrive on time? Would the caterer remember about Aunt Margaret's dietary restrictions? Would I trip walking down the aisle in my grandmother's vintage heels? Instead, I was worried about Everly. She had been suspiciously quiet for the past week, which somehow felt more ominous than her usual interference. Eleanor had mentioned that Everly was planning something special for the wedding, but when pressed for details, she just smiled mysteriously and said it would be a surprise. I was in the bridal suite, surrounded by my bridesmaids, when my maid of honor Sarah burst through the door with a look of pure horror on her face. "You need to see this," she said, holding up her phone. "Everly just posted this on Instagram." The image made my stomach drop. Everly stood in front of a full-length mirror, wearing what could only be described as funeral attire. A black dress so dark it seemed to absorb light, paired with a vintage black veil that cascaded down her back. She looked like a widow from a Victorian mourning portrait. The caption read, "Preparing for a very sad day. Sometimes you have to mourn the loss of something precious. Family first, memories, black is beautiful. She's not seriously wearing that to your wedding," my sister Emma said, looking over my shoulder at the phone. But I knew she was. This was Everly's final power play, her way of making a statement that everyone would remember long after the last dance was over. She was going to show up to my wedding dressed for a funeral, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. The ceremony was beautiful despite everything. Jason looked handsome in his navy suit, his eyes bright with unshed tears as I walked down the aisle. My father squeezed my arm before placing my hand in Jason's, whispering, "He's a good man, sweetheart. Don't let anyone steal your joy today." I tried to focus on Jason's face, on the words the officiant was speaking, on the promises we were making to each other, but I couldn't ignore the murmur that rippled through the congregation when Everly made her entrance. She glided down the aisle like a specter, her black dress rustling with each step. The veil covered most of her face, but I could see the satisfied smirk underneath. She had timed her arrival perfectly. Just late enough to draw attention. Just early enough to avoid being truly rude. Eleanor looked mortified, tugging at Everly's arm as they took their seats in the front row, but Everly shook her off, settling into her chair with the dramatic flair of someone attending a state funeral. Later, during the reception, people kept approaching me with barely concealed curiosity. "Your sister-in-law looks interesting tonight," my college roommate whispered. "Is everything okay with Everly?" "She seems upset about something," asked Jason's cousin. Even the photographer pulled me aside. "I'm not sure how to approach this delicately, but the woman in black is really standing out in the family photos. Would you like me to maybe position her differently?" But the worst part was watching Jason's face throughout the evening. Every time someone mentioned Everly's outfit, he looked a little more deflated, a little more embarrassed. This was supposed to be our perfect day, and she had managed to turn it into a spectacle. During our first dance, I whispered in Jason's ear, "Why is she doing this to us?" He held me tighter, his jaw clenched. "I don't know," he said, "but I promise you, this is the last time she ruins something important to us." Famous last words. The first year of marriage should have been blissful, but Everly made sure we had no peace. She developed an uncanny ability to sense when Jason and I were having a good time and insert herself into the situation. A romantic dinner out? Everly would show up at the same restaurant with Eleanor, claiming it was a coincidence. A weekend getaway? She'd book the adjoining hotel room, explaining that she'd been planning the same trip for months. Eleanor began apologizing for her wife's behavior more and more frequently. I could see the strain it was putting on their marriage. Eleanor was a kind, intelligent woman who deserved better than being dragged into Everly's psychological warfare. I don't know what's gotten into her. Eleanor confided to me one afternoon when we met for coffee without Everly. She's always been protective of Jason, but this is different. It's like she sees you as a threat to something I don't even understand. Maybe she's afraid of losing her place in the family, I suggested, trying to be charitable. Eleanor shook her head. "That's just it, she's not losing anything. If anything, your presence has brought everyone closer together. Jason's parents adore you, and you've been nothing but patient with her behavior." What Eleanor didn't know, what none of us knew at the time, was that Everly had been systematically trying to sabotage my relationships with other family members too. She would call Jason's mother with concerns about my behavior at family gatherings. Apparently, I had been standoffish at Easter dinner, judgmental about Cousin Mike's drinking problem, and dismissive of Grandma Rose's stories about the old days. None of it was true, but Everly was skilled at planting seeds of doubt. She'd frame her concerns as worry for Jason's happiness, claiming she just wanted everyone to get along. Jason's mother, Linda, eventually told me about these conversations, but not before months of slightly cooler interactions that left me feeling confused and hurt. The breaking point came on Jason's birthday. I'd planned a surprise party for weeks, coordinating with all his friends and family members. It was going to be perfect. His favorite restaurant, his favorite people, and the announcement I'd been dying to make. I was pregnant. Jason and I had been trying for 6 months, and I had just gotten the confirmation from my doctor that morning. I could barely contain my excitement as I prepared for the party. I had even bought a special card that read, "Happy birthday, Daddy," for the moment when we'd share our news with everyone. The party was everything I'd hoped for. Jason was genuinely surprised and deeply touched that I'd gone to such lengths to celebrate him. His friends told embarrassing college stories. His parents shared childhood photos, and everyone laughed until their sides hurt. As dinner wound down and we prepared for dessert, I stood up to make my announcement. My heart was racing with joy and anticipation. "If I could have everyone's attention," I began, holding Jason's hand. "I have a very special birthday present for my husband." That's when Everly appeared at my elbow with a plate of food. "Oh, sweetheart," she said loudly, cutting through my speech. "I know you didn't get to eat much during all the party preparations. I made sure the kitchen saved you a special plate." I looked down at what she was offering me, and my blood turned to ice. Shrimp. A heaping plate of shrimp scampi, glistening with butter and garlic. Everly knew I was deathly allergic to shellfish. She had known since the day we met, when Jason had specifically told her to be careful about what restaurants we chose for family dinners. She knew that even a small amount could send me into anaphylactic shock. "I'm not hungry," I said carefully, not taking the plate. "Oh, don't be silly," Everly insisted, her voice sweet but her eyes hard. "You've been running around all evening taking care of everyone else. You need to eat something. I made sure they prepared this especially for you." The table had gone quiet. Everyone was looking at us, confusion clear on their faces. Jason frowned, not understanding the tension he was sensing. "Everly," I said firmly, "you know I can't eat shellfish." She blinked innocently. "Oh my goodness, I completely forgot. How silly of me. Eleanor, you love shrimp. Why don't you take this?" Before I could stop her, Eleanor reached for the plate. What happened next unfolded like a nightmare in slow motion. Eleanor took a generous forkful of the shrimp scampi, commenting on how delicious it looked. She had barely swallowed the first bite when her expression changed. "This tastes strange," she said, setting down her fork. "Kind of metallic?" Within seconds, Eleanor's face went pale. She clutched her stomach, doubling over in her chair. "Something's wrong," she gasped. I can't." Then she collapsed. Chows erupted. Jason's father, a retired doctor, immediately went into emergency mode, checking Eleanor's pulse and breathing. Someone called 911 while others cleared space around her. Eleanor was convulsing slightly, foam forming at the corners of her mouth. "What did she eat?" Dr. Matthews demanded as he tried to stabilize Eleanor. "Just the shrimp," I said, my voice shaking. Everly brought me a plate of shrimp, but Eleanor ate it instead. All eyes turned to Everly, who stood frozen with an expression of shocked horror that looked almost disappointed. But then she snapped into action, kneeling beside her wife and crying hysterically. "Eleanor! Oh God, Eleanor, please be okay. I don't understand what happened." The paramedics arrived within minutes and rushed Eleanor to the hospital. We all followed in a caravan of cars, the birthday celebration forgotten in our panic and fear. At the hospital, we learned that Eleanor had been poisoned, not with shellfish, with something far more sinister. The blood tests revealed traces of rat poison in her system. Warfarin, to be specific, a powerful anticoagulant that could cause internal bleeding and organ failure. "How is that possible?" Jason asked the doctor in disbelief. "She just ate some shrimp from the restaurant." The doctor looked grim. "I'm afraid this wasn't an accident. The concentration of warfarin in her system is far too high to be from accidental contamination. Someone deliberately poisoned that food." The police were called immediately. While Eleanor fought for her life in the ICU, detectives began interviewing everyone who had been at the party. They collected the leftover food from the restaurant, including what remained on Eleanor's plate. Everly played the role of the devastated wife perfectly. She sobbed in the waiting room, holding Eleanor's hand whenever the doctors allowed visitors. She answered the police's questions with apparent cooperation, expressing bewilderment about how such a thing could happen. "We were all eating from the same menu," she told Detective Morrison. "I don't understand how only Eleanor got sick. This is my worst nightmare." But I couldn't shake the memory of that moment when Everly first offered me the plate. The insistence that I eat it, the way she had emphasized that it was prepared especially for me. And then her quick thinking when I refused, immediately offering it to Eleanor instead. "Jason," I whispered to my husband during one of our brief breaks from the hospital, "I think Everly meant for me to eat that shrimp." He stared at me in disbelief. "What are you saying? Think about it. She knows about my shellfish allergy. If I had eaten that food and gotten sick, everyone would have assumed it was an allergic reaction. They might not have even tested for poison. By the time they figured out what really happened, it might have been too late." Jason's face went white. "You can't seriously think Everly would try to poison you." "I don't want to think it," I said. "But Jason, she's been trying to get rid of me for years. What if she finally decided to take more drastic action?" The security footage proved everything. 3 days later, while Eleanor remained in critical condition, Detective Morrison called us with an update that changed everything. The restaurant's security cameras had captured something extraordinary and damning. "We need you to come down to the station," he said. "There's something you need to see." At the police station, we crowded around a computer monitor as the detective queued up the footage. It was grainy, black and white, but clear enough to see what mattered. "This is from the restaurant's kitchen camera. Timestamp 8:47 p.m., Detective Morrison explained. Watch the woman in the blue dress." There was Everly, moving through the restaurant's kitchen like she belonged there. She spoke to one of the servers, later identified as Marcus, a young man she had apparently befriended during the party setup. She handed him something small, gesturing toward a specific plate of food on the pass. "We interviewed Marcus," the detective continued. "He says Everly told him she wanted to add some special seasoning to surprise a family member. She claimed it was a special spice blend that would make the shrimp extra delicious. She gave him $20 and said it was very important that the right person got that specific plate." The next part of the footage showed Marcus dutifully sprinkling something over the shrimp scampi. It looked innocent enough, just another kitchen worker following instructions. "We found the container she gave him in the restaurant's trash," Detective Morrison said grimly. "It was a small vial that originally contained warfarin, rat poison." Jason stared at the screen in stunned silence. "She really did it. She tried to poison my wife." "The evidence suggests that Mrs. Chen was the intended target," the detective agreed. "The positioning, the insistence on you eating that specific plate, and then the quick offer to Eleanor when you refused, it all points to premeditation." I felt sick to my stomach, and not just from morning sickness. She was willing to kill me. Over what? Because she doesn't like me? "We're still trying to understand the motive," Detective Morrison said. "But we have enough evidence to make an arrest." Everly Stevens is being charged with attempted murder. The arrest happened at the hospital, where Everly had been maintaining her vigil by Eleanor's bedside. I wasn't there to see it, but Jason's mother Linda described the scene later. "She was holding Eleanor's hand, crying about how much she loved her," Linda said with disgust, "right up until the officers walked in with handcuffs. Then she just changed. Like a switch flipped. The tears stopped, and she got this cold, calculating look in her eyes." Eleanor, thankfully, began to recover once the doctors knew what they were treating. The warfarin had caused some internal bleeding and heart complications, but she was young and strong. More importantly, she had gotten medical attention quickly enough to prevent permanent damage. When Eleanor was finally conscious and alert enough to understand what had happened, her reaction broke everyone's hearts. "She tried to poison someone at our family party?" Eleanor whispered weakly. "With food she gave them? And I ate it instead?" "Eleanor, she was trying to kill me," I said gently. "You saved my life by eating that food." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I don't understand. Why would Everly want to hurt you? She's my wife. She's supposed to love me. How could she be willing to risk poisoning me just to get to you?" It was a question none of us could answer satisfactorily. How do you explain that level of hatred? That willingness to destroy innocent lives in pursuit of some twisted vendetta? But we were about to learn that Everly's motivations were even more complex and disturbing than we had imagined. Everly's trial began 6 months later. Eleanor had recovered physically, but the emotional trauma of learning that her wife had been willing to risk her life to harm someone else had left deep scars. She filed for divorce within weeks of Everly's arrest and moved back to her parents' house across the country. "I can't even look at her," Eleanor told me during one of our phone conversations. "Every time I close my eyes, I see that moment when she handed you the plate. She knew what was on it. She knew what it would do. And she was willing to let me die as collateral damage." The prosecution painted a picture of Everly as a woman consumed by jealousy and control. They brought in testimony from family members about her pattern of manipulative behavior over the years. They showed the security footage, presented the physical evidence, and called expert witnesses to explain how warfarin poisoning works. But it was Everly's own testimony that truly revealed the depth of her obsession. She took the stand in her own defense, dressed conservatively and speaking in the soft, sweet voice that had fooled so many people for so long. Her lawyer tried to paint her as a woman who had made a terrible mistake. Someone who had only meant to make me sick, not to kill anyone. "I never intended for Eleanor to get hurt," Everly testified, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "I love my wife. I would never do anything to harm her." "But you did intend to harm the defendant?" the prosecutor asked. Everly's mask slipped for just a moment. "She took everything from me," she said, her voice hardening. "Jason was supposed to be mine to protect. Our family was perfect before she came along and ruined everything." "Perfect how, Miss Stevens?" "Jason depended on me. When he was sad, he called me. When he needed advice, he came to me. When he was lonely, I was there for him. We had a special relationship, and she destroyed it." The prosecutor pressed further. "So you decided to poison her?" "I just wanted her gone," Everly admitted. "I thought if she got really sick, maybe she'd realize she didn't belong with our family. Maybe she'd leave on her own. But you used rat poison, Miss Stevens. Warfarin is a potentially lethal substance. You had to know that the dosage you used could kill her." Everly's composure finally cracked completely. "She deserved it," she screamed. "She stole my brother. She stole my place in the family. And then she had the nerve to announce her pregnancy at Jason's birthday party. My idea. I was going to announce that Eleanor and I were expecting too, but she ruined it with her stupid surprise." The courtroom fell silent. Even her defense attorney looked stunned. "You were pregnant?" the prosecutor asked. Eleanor was pregnant. Everly corrected herself quickly, realizing what she had revealed. We had been trying, and we found out that week. I wanted to share our good news at the party, but then she made her big announcement and took all the attention. Later investigation would reveal that Eleanor had not been pregnant, and that Everly had been lying about their attempts to conceive. It was just another layer of fantasy in her increasingly distorted worldview. The jury took less than 3 hours to find Everly guilty of attempted murder in the first degree. The judge sentenced her to 15 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 10 years. "Miss Stevens," Judge Harrison said during sentencing, Your actions that night were not the result of a momentary lapse in judgment or a crime of passion. They were the culmination of years of calculated manipulation and control. You obtained poison, you planned how to deliver it, and you were willing to risk multiple innocent lives to satisfy your obsession. This court finds your behavior to be particularly heinous because it was disguised as an act of caring. As they led Everly away in handcuffs, she turned to look at Jason one last time. "I did it all for you," she called out. "I only wanted to protect our family." Jason didn't respond. He just held my hand tighter and looked straight ahead. The months following Everly's sentencing were a strange mix of relief and continued trauma. On one hand, we finally had our lives back. No more surprise visits, no more manufactured emergencies, no more subtle sabotage of our relationships with family and friends. For the first time since we'd met, Jason and I could enjoy being married without constantly looking over our shoulders. But the psychological scars ran deep. I found myself checking expiration dates obsessively, refusing to eat anything I hadn't prepared myself when we were at restaurants or social gatherings. The sound of the doorbell would make my heart race, even though I knew Everly was locked away in prison. Jason struggled with guilt. "I should have seen it," he'd say during our late-night conversations. "All those years, all those signs, and I kept making excuses for her. I put you in danger because I couldn't face the truth about who she really was." "She fooled everyone," I reminded him. "Even Eleanor, who lived with her. Even your parents." Everly was very good at hiding her true nature. Our son David was born 7 months after the trial ended, a healthy, beautiful baby who brought light back into our lives. Holding him in my arms, I felt overwhelmed by gratitude that Everly's plan had failed. If she had succeeded, David would never have existed. The thought was almost too terrible to contemplate. Jason's family rallied around us during this time. His parents, Linda and Robert, were mortified that they had enabled Everly's behavior for so long. They made a point of acknowledging how she had mistreated me over the years and apologizing for not standing up to her sooner. "We kept telling ourselves it would get better," Linda confessed during one of our Sunday dinners. "We thought if we just gave her time, she'd come around and accept you. We never imagined she was capable of something like this." Eleanor stayed in touch despite everything. She was seeing a therapist to work through the trauma of discovering that the person she had trusted most in the world had been willing to sacrifice her life. But she was remarkably strong and determined to rebuild. "I refuse to let her take any more of my life than she already has," Eleanor told me during one of our phone calls. "I'm dating someone new. A wonderful woman named Sarah who treats me with respect and honesty. It's amazing how different it feels to be with someone who doesn't try to manipulate every situation." As for Everly, she tried to maintain contact from prison. She wrote letters to Jason, pleading for forgiveness, and claiming that prison had given her time to reflect on her mistakes. She insisted that she had only acted out of love for the family and begged him to bring David to visit her. Jason never responded to a single letter. "She had her chance to be part of our family," he said when I asked if he was tempted to write back. "She chose poison instead. That's not love. That's possession. And I won't expose our son to that kind of toxicity." The letters eventually stopped coming. According to Jason's cousin who worked in social services, Everly had been involved in several incidents at the prison, fights with other inmates, conflicts with guards, and at least one attempt to manipulate a fellow prisoner into helping her with some scheme. She had been moved to a maximum security facility and lost most of her privileges. Some people thought we were being too harsh by cutting off all contact. A few distant relatives suggested that Everly deserved a chance at redemption, that family should always forgive family. But we had learned a hard lesson about the difference between forgiveness and self-preservation. Forgiveness didn't mean we had to expose ourselves to continued harm. It didn't mean we had to pretend that what Everly had done was acceptable or that she deserved a place in our lives. We could forgive her and still protect ourselves and our children from her influence. 3 years passed in relative peace. David grew from a baby into a curious, energetic toddler who filled our house with laughter. I got pregnant again, and we welcomed our daughter Emma, named after my sister who had been such a strong support during the dark times. Jason thrived at work and at home. Without the constant stress of managing Everly's drama, he became more relaxed, more confident, and more present in our marriage. We bought a house in a different neighborhood, partly for more space, but also to have a fresh start somewhere that didn't hold memories of Everly's interference. Then, in the 4th year after Everly's conviction, we received news that sent chills down our spines. She was eligible for parole. "It's just a hearing," Jason's father explained when he called to tell us. "She's not automatically released. The parole board will review her case and decide if she's ready to rejoin society." But the thought of Everly potentially walking free, potentially trying to contact us or find us, was terrifying. We had built a beautiful life in her absence, and the idea of that peace being shattered was almost unbearable. The parole hearing was held on a cold Thursday morning in February. We attended along with several other family members and Eleanor, who had flown in from across the country to testify. Everly looked different after 4 years in prison. Thinner, grayer, with new lines around her eyes. But when she spoke to the parole board, she sounded exactly the same, sweet, remorseful, and utterly convincing. "I take full responsibility for my actions," she said, her voice trembling with apparent emotion. "I was in a very dark place mentally, dealing with issues I didn't understand. The prison counselor has helped me realize that I was struggling with severe anxiety and depression that manifested as controlling behavior toward my family members." She talked about the therapy she'd undergone, the anger management classes she'd completed, and her newfound understanding of how her actions had affected others. "I know I can never undo the harm I caused," she continued. "Eleanor almost died because of my selfishness, and I have to live with that for the rest of my life. All I want is a chance to prove that I've changed, to show that I can be a productive member of society." When it was our turn to speak, Eleanor went first. "Everly was my wife for 3 years," she said, her voice steady and strong. "I thought I knew her better than anyone. But the woman who poisoned that food and was willing to risk my life to hurt someone else, that's not someone who deserves another chance at freedom. She's had 4 years to think about what she did, and I've never received a single letter of apology from her. Not one acknowledgement of how her actions affected me personally." I spoke next, my hands shaking as I held my prepared statement. "Everly spent years trying to destroy my marriage and my relationships with this family," I said. "When emotional manipulation didn't work, she turned to attempted murder. The only reason I'm alive today is luck. The luck that I didn't eat the food she prepared for me. The only reason Eleanor survived is because she got medical attention quickly enough. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was the culmination of years of escalating behavior." Jason spoke last, his voice thick with emotion. "My children will never know their aunt because she chose hatred over love. She chose violence over family. She may have served her time according to the law, but that doesn't mean she deserves access to our lives again." The parole board deliberated for 2 hours. When they returned, the chairwoman's expression was grave. "Miss Stevens, while we acknowledge that you have participated in prison programs and expressed remorse for your actions, this board has concerns about your readiness for release." They cited several factors: her disciplinary issues in prison, the calculated nature of her original crime, and the lack of any meaningful attempt to make amends to her actual victims. Parole denied. "You will be eligible for another hearing in 3 years. As I write this, it's been 7 years since that terrible birthday party that changed our lives forever. Everly was denied parole a second time 2 years ago. She'll be eligible again next year, but we've been told that her behavior in prison continues to be problematic. She's been involved in more incidents, including an attempt to smuggle contraband and allegations of threatening another inmate. Our children are now 6 and 4, old enough to ask questions about why they don't have an Aunt Everly like some of their friends have aunts. We've told them age-appropriate versions of the truth, that sometimes people make very bad choices that hurt others, and when that happens, we have to protect ourselves by staying away from them. David is curious and empathetic, always asking if Aunt Everly will ever say sorry and come to family dinners. Emma is more pragmatic, declaring that anyone who tries to hurt Mommy should stay away forever. Jason has become an even better husband and father through this experience. He learned to set boundaries with toxic people, even family members. He's also become fiercely protective of our little family unit, something I find both touching and necessary given what we've been through. Eleanor rebuilt her life beautifully. She married Sarah 3 years ago in a simple, joyful ceremony surrounded by people who genuinely loved and supported them. She's pregnant with their first child and recently sent us a photo from her baby shower, a picture of her glowing with happiness, surrounded by friends who celebrate her rather than manipulate her. The extended family has adjusted to life without Everly. Holiday gatherings are peaceful now, filled with genuine laughter rather than the tense undercurrents that used to characterize every family event. Jason's parents often comment on how much happier these occasions have become. "We didn't realize how much stress she was creating for everyone," Linda told me recently. "Walking on eggshells trying to manage her reactions, constantly worrying about what she might do next. It was exhausting for all of us. I still have moments of anxiety, especially when I'm alone with the children or when unexpected visitors come to the door. I probably always will. The knowledge that someone hated me enough to try to kill me, and was willing to sacrifice innocent people to do it, leaves scars that never fully heal. But I refuse to let Everly's poison continue to contaminate our lives. We've built something beautiful from the ashes of that terrible experience. Our marriage is stronger because we faced the worst together and survived. Our family is closer because we learned to prioritize what really matters. Our children are growing up in a home filled with genuine love and honesty, not manipulation and control. Sometimes people ask me if I feel sorry for Everly, locked away in prison while we live our happy lives. The honest answer is complicated. I feel sorry for the woman who was so consumed by jealousy and need for control that she destroyed everything good in her life. I feel sorry for Eleanor, who lost years of her life to someone who didn't deserve her love. I feel sorry for Jason, who had to learn that his family member was capable of attempted murder. But I don't feel sorry for the consequences Everly faces. She made her choices with full knowledge of what she was doing. She chose hatred over healing, violence over acceptance, and poison over peace. Those choices led her exactly where she deserves to be. Our story could have ended so differently. If I had eaten that food, if Eleanor hadn't gotten medical attention quickly enough, if the security cameras hadn't captured the evidence we needed, any number of factors could have changed everything. Instead, we're here. We're alive. We're happy. We're free. And that's the best revenge of all, living a beautiful life that Everly can never touch again. When I tuck my children into bed each night, kiss my husband goodnight, and feel the deep satisfaction of a day well lived, I'm reminded that love really does conquer hate in the end. Not through grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but through the simple act of choosing to build something good instead of tearing others down. Everly may have introduced poison into our lives, but we chose to cultivate something better. We chose each other, we chose forgiveness without endangering ourselves, and we chose to create a future that honors the people we could have lost. The nightmare is over. The healing continues. And our story, the real story, the one filled with love and growth and second chances, that story is just beginning.